Welcome back to DK Sports Radio. You're listening to the Carter Six Pack. The Carter Six Pack is a show where myself, Chris Carter, NFL analyst here at DKPittsburghSports.com, brings you the top six in a given sports topic related to Pittsburgh. We have gone through several things. Sometimes it's not necessarily in order. It's just six things that we name. But this time we're ranking them. It's rankings. We're going to bring up something relevant. The NFL draft just ended. And the Steelers, one of the more interesting picks is Mason Rudolph, the quarterback out of Oklahoma State, who was slated by some to be a first-round quarterback. They selected him in the third round. That was very interesting. And now that brings up a question: is can he be? Will he become the franchise quarterback for the Steelers after Ben Roethlisberger? And that would be an interesting thing to happen with a third-round draft pick being the guy of the future. And while that's way ahead of us, it made me think, let's talk some history here. And let's go through our top six third-round draft picks in Pittsburgh Steelers history. Now, we went through several guys. We got some honorable mentions we'll say after we go through our list. But this is my list, so I'm going to compare it with yours. I want you to put your thinking caps on, go through history, see how many people you can name off the top of your head, and just see who do you have as your top. I know who I have as mine, and we'll start with the guy that a few people might remember. He was a guy that was around when I started watching football.
Number six.
That's right. At number 6 comes Jason Gildon. Now, Jason Gildon, a very talented. He was a defensive end coming out of college, but he became a super outside linebacker for the Steelers. He was drafted way back in 1994. Right now, as it stands, he is the second all-time leader in team sacks with 77 in the 10 years that he played for the team. Jason Gildon was a key pass rusher. Wore that number 92 before James Harrison, and he was just a dangerous presence out on the edge. He was always bringing heat. His biggest years came when he came into his prime between 2000 and 2002. Between those 3 years, 2000, 2001, and 2002, he made the Pro Bowl all 3 times. Had 13 and a half sacks in 2000, 12 sacks in the 2001, and then 9 in 2002. He was a key contributor to when that Steelers defense flipped back and started to become a dominant force in the NFL again, and really revitalized 3-4 defenses in the NFL between him and Joey Porter. Those two wreaked havoc amongst the league. We have him down on the list because he didn't get to stick around for the Steelers Super Bowl year. He ended his career in Jacksonville. But he absolutely was a dominant presence and was a great value with that third round pick. And if it wasn't for James Harrison coming out of retirement and having his last few years with the team, he would still have the most sacks in team history with that 77. But Harrison overtook him. Still, a lot of respect for Jason Gildon and the work that he did at outside linebacker. That's why we have him at number 6.
Number 5.
Number 5 is a guy that most people might not think of, and it's going to be Max Starks, the left tackle. He was selected in 2004. Starks was a huge person, to say the least. But what was even bigger for this guy was how he contributed to the offensive line in the transition that it went in the late 2000s. He got his first start in 2005, where he was basically the blindside protector for Ben Roethlisberger as they won that Super Bowl. That's the thing. Max Starks is a 2-time Super Bowl champion. That's why we have him listed above Jason Gildon. And he was that key left tackle that was able to protect Ben Roethlisberger. And if people remember, after that offensive line that had Jeff Hardings and Alan Faneca and Max Starks was a part of it. After that line sort of crumbled, Starks was the only remaining piece of that offensive line as they went and got players like Chris Kimoatu and the offensive line that won the second Super Bowl of the Roethlisberger era. And many called that the worst offensive line to ever win a Super Bowl. And as much as everyone talks about that, Max Starks was the guy that put it all together. And also, I think what really boosts Max Starks from me on this list, and I'm an old offensive lineman, I love the Beefalo, so people may think, well, he can't go over Gildon. And here's my piece on that. One, Max Starks was he wasn't a major character in both those Super Bowls, but he was one of the role players that was key to making sure the offensive line was solid, and he provided a presence that brought the offensive line together to help them create continuity and when you think about over the years, he was often the guy that was the most consistent, kept the team together. And if people remember, in 2012, when he was no longer with the Steelers, Ben Roethlisberger came to training camp. When they did their practice at Heinz Field, he wore Max Stark's jersey, number 78, to basically show everyone he wants the Steelers to bring him back, and they did. He came back for a few more years. Ultimately, Max Starks, was never the dominant player, but he was a very solid left tackle. And without him, they might not have been able to protect Ben Roethlisberger as much as they did in 2008. But he was also part of some good running games with Willie Parker, Jerome Bettis, and helping again usher. He was the bridge of that offensive line between the Faneca and Harding years up until the Marquise Pouncey years, when he was able to start taking over the offensive line. And now you have the era with him and David DeCastro. So Max Starks not lost on us. He gets our number 5.
Number 4.
Coming in at number 4 is a guy that most Steelers fans will immediately remember. That's number 55, Joey Porter. Now, Joey Porter was drafted in 1999. He is we've already gone over. We talked about the guy who's number 2 in sacks. Joey Porter's number 3 in sacks. He had 60 for the team over the course of his 8 years with the squad. But nothing really. What puts Joey Porter? He does have a Super Bowl ring, but what puts Joey Porter over the top isn't numbers. It isn't his 10.5 sacks in 2005, along with 2 interceptions, though. But it is the 2005 season where he was a key leader for that defense, and that defense. That was Blitzburgh. That was bringing the heat. They set a tone in the NFL, and they was really an era of Dick LeBeau defense that became legendary for Steelers, and should remain legendary for a long time. And just Joey Porter, his presence in the locker room, on the field, off the field, he was a leader, whether people liked it or not. One thing, back in 2001 into the 2001-2002 playoffs, when they lost to the New England Patriots, Joey Porter dropped a pick 6 that could have beaten the Patriots inside the red zone, and he said he never forgave himself for it. And he wanted to make sure that he made up for that. Well, in 2005, he was playing absolutely no games. If everyone remembers the game against Peyton Manning, when the Troy Polamalu intercepted Manning, got up and then dropped the ball. They called it an incomplete pass. It was a controversial ruling at the time. The NFL would later apologize for it, but at the time, it gave new life to the Indianapolis Colts and helped them get back in the game. Joey Porter came out and said he was going to end the game, and he had back-to-back sacks on 3rd and 4th down of Peyton Manning in his own red zone, and that ultimately set the stage to close the game. We all remember it didn't, because Jerome Bettis would fumble on the next couple plays. But Joey Porter was able to close out the game, and he had a legendary quote, "Cheat that," as he yelled it into the cameras, because he was so upset still about the call that they took away the interception from Troy Polamalu. But even beyond that, after the game, he had another legendary moment when he had been goading the Colts all the week before, and people were talking about it in the press, and it was driving Bill Cowher crazy. And so he said, "Peasy, please don't say anything this week." And Joey Porter's legendary response was "Forget that, man. They shot me in Denver." And that is still a huge quote in Steelers lore for Steelers fans. And he was even after that, he was such a team leader when the Steelers made the Super Bowl. It was Jerome Bettis' his final ride. He was going to play the Super Bowl in his hometown of Detroit. He not only made sure that the entire team wore Notre Dame jerseys of Jerome Bettis, including USC's Troy Polamalu, and he said it hurt him to wear that jersey, but he did it because he loved Jerome and because Joey told him so. Joey Porter, when they were announcing the Steelers and they called them out of the tunnel, and the team, instead of the team all running out at the same time as they normally do, there's that iconic picture of him with his arms out blocking the entire team as he allowed Jerome Bettis to run by himself and lead the Steelers out the tunnel. That man, for that season, he earns our number 4 pick. He was a huge part of that of Bill Cowher's only Super Bowl, and definitely with his leadership that he sort of developed over time. I thought early in his career he needed to grow up, but he certainly did and became a leader for that defense. That's why we got Joey Porter at number 4.
Number 3.
Number 3 is a guy that most people won't think about. He's another player that that wore the number 55, and it's funny because most people think Joey Porter would think 55, but it's John Kolb of 1969, third round draft pick. From then, he is a 4-time Super Bowl champion, starting at left tackle. He was no guy to push around. He was a huge part of that Steelers offensive line that dominated defenses for so many years. He was drafted in 69 and became a key component to that offensive line. He was a bruiser, and he was a huge part. Worked alongside Mike Webster when he was able to join the team in 1974, and eventually became a starter in 75. But he got to work next to Ray Mansfield for several years. And Cole, he was just a dominating presence at left tackle, protecting Terry Bradshaw, but also plowing the way for Franco Harris, that dominant ground game that the Steelers exhibited. And you'll see several of those games when the Steelers were going up against like the Raiders and the Vikings and the Cowboys. You'll see John Colt right in there just dishing it and whooping people up and down the field. He would pull, he would go hit somebody, and he would always talk about how the Steelers infused that technique and make sure that that the offensive line was so good. And you have to look at John Colt, and you look at the tape, and you're just like, man, that was a dominant offensive tackle back in the time. And to this day, he's a guy that I've talked to a lot. I talked to a lot of Steelers fans, and people tell me I'm not so sure. I know there's a lot of talk about how many Steelers aren't in the Hall of Fame from that team that should be, like L.C. Greenwood and Donnie Shell. But some people say John Cole was a guy that often gets overlooked for how dominant he was as a left tackle. But in many ways, Cole embodied the never quit, the always look for the next day to win attitude. The tomorrow people attitude that the Steelers of the 70s induced. And there's a quote that I really loved when he said, some people say the glass is half empty. Some people say the glass is half full. I say they're both losers, because who wants to live with half a glass? And I think that just embodies it. Like, you know what? The Steelers, they didn't care if they had one Super Bowl, two Super Bowls. They were coming to get another one every chance they get. John Cole embodied that spirit, was a huge part of that offensive line. And though there's so many stars from that offense, from that whole team of Steelers in the 70s, that Cole just gets overlooked so many times. I think when people talk about that team, and we're not overlooking them, that's why we made him number 3 on our list.
Number 2.
Number 2 is an obvious one. Most people might have thought at the top of the list that this guy would be number 1, but I'm saying Hines Ward, third-round draft pick of 1998. He was a quarterback for Georgia, but the Steelers brought him in, made him a wide receiver, and he became the legendary Hines Ward. He was a guy I called Mr. Steeler for so many years because he just embodied that nastiness of the Pittsburgh Steelers, but also he was the playmaker of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that's what made him so spectacular, because he was able to, over his time, he amassed 1,000 receptions, the most in team history, 12,053 yards, the most in team history, 85 touchdowns, also the most in team history. This guy made 4 Pro Bowls. His biggest year was in 2002 when he had 1,329 yards, 112 receptions for 12 touchdowns. This guy was a baller. He was my favorite Steeler as a kid because I loved how hard he hit, how hard he worked. And even when people hit him, he got up smiling. He had the attitude, and he made receivers better around him. Plaxico Burress came into the league. He was struggling. He was having problems here and there. But when Hines Ward got to work with him, you saw him sort of develop, become a better receiver, become more consistent. The same could be said for Antoine Randall, and even with receivers that people like sort of about when they talk about Limas Sweed. Everyone remembers that big drop that Limas Sweed had in the AFC Championship game against the Ravens back in the 2008-2009 season. But who was there to pick up Limas Sweed? And he wasn't even able to play because he was hurt, and that was Hines Ward. He goes to Limas Sweed, says, come here. He's like, I don't care about that. You go make a play on that. You go make the next play. And sure enough, Limas Sweed laid out Corey Ivy when Heath Miller was running up the sideline later in that game, and it was a vicious hit, and you never saw anything of it. If Limas Sweed did nothing else for the Steelers, which he did nothing else for the Steelers, that moment was because Hines Ward was there, and he created that environment with the wide receiver position that has carried on through we've seen for the Steelers since he's been there. You had Santonio Holmes go through, the Mike Wallace, the Fast Money crew with the Cash Money crew, whatever you call those guys, with Mike Wallace and Emmanuel Sanders, and then of course Antonio Brown seemed like he was the run of the litter for a little bit, and then all of a sudden he's the best in the league, maybe in team history. I don't think there's a maybe in it. He definitely is. And that's the thing. All of Hines Ward's records they're sitting pretty right now, but AB's pretty close, and he's closing in on him. But still, Hines Ward can't overlook how big he was for the franchise. 2-time Super Bowl champion, Super Bowl 40 MVP, again, 4-time Pro Bowler. They don't win either of those Super Bowls with Hines Ward not on their roster. And just there's so many legendary hits on Keith Rivers, on Ed Reed, on Ray Lewis. He would just pick people off and send the message that, hey, if you're coming to hit us, we're going to hit you too. And that's kind of what the Steelers, if every time you thought about the Steelers, you thought about Hines Ward, and not only how he would make plays in tough situations, you could never just bring him down with one guy. He was always looking to make the next play, but he was also always looking to make the next hit. Hines Ward, my number 2 third-round draft pick for the Steelers all time.
Miller Lite is the original light beer, and we'll always brew it to have more taste, with only 96 calories and 3.2 carbs. Because we believe that if you compromise on taste, you can taste the compromise. Miller Lite. Hold true.
Great beer, great responsibility. 2018 Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Average analysis, 12 fluid ounces. Less than 1 gram protein, 0 grams fat.
If you're one of the thousands of Western Pennsylvanians who love to get outdoors, then you need to check out this cool new website, stepoutside.org. Learn where, when, and how you can go camping, hiking, or hunting. Or take part in power sports, shooting sports, or water sports in your local community or across the country at stepoutside.org, where everything you need to know is just a click away. That's stepoutside.org.
What I want from my public accounting firm is big ideas.
But I don't want to lose the personal attention.
My company needs global capabilities.
From a firm with local ownership.
And I want to work with industry experts.
Who take the time to understand my unique challenges. And that's what sets Schneider Downs apart. Expertise for the most complex business issues. With the service you need every day. To learn how our big thinking with a personal focus can help your company, visit schneiderdowns.com.
Injured in an accident? Need assistance in preserving your business's interests? Let the attorneys at Bassey, Vreeland & Associates protect your legal rights. For over 65 years, Bassey, Vreeland & Associates has been representing the citizens and businesses of southwestern Pennsylvania. With offices strategically located in Washington and Charleroi, Bassey, Vreeland & Associates can deliver results for you throughout the Pittsburgh area. Visit www.bmvlaw.com or call 724-228-7000 to see how Bassey, Vreeland & Associates can meet your legal needs. Bassey, Vreeland & Associates. We fight, we care, we win.
Before we get to number 1, we're going to do our honorable mentions real quick. I think we'd be remiss to not list some of these guys. And we talked about Mike Wallace at 2009. I mean, yeah, he didn't last that long, but he was a decent playmaker for the Steelers for quite some time. I think he averaged like 8 touchdowns a season while he was there. You had Emmanuel Sanders, who I guess really is kind of like, really, they were just both really good playmakers. Neil O'Donnell in 1989 was a third-round draft pick. That was one that was kind of interesting. But the guy that was really the real honorable mention of this group is 2002 Chris Hope. And not Chris Hoke, Chris Hope, the safety that eventually left for the Tennessee Titans. Chris Hope was an enforcer safety. He was the predecessor for what Ryan Clark became for the late 2000 Steelers. But he was every bit a part of that secondary in the 2005-2006 Super Bowl run, the Super Bowl 40. I almost put him on this list, but I felt like Jason Gilden should have been there. That's why Chris Hope's my top honorable mention of a third-round draft pick in Steelers history. But let's get to the countdown, folks. We're going to revisit all our players that we listed in order before we reveal our number 1. Remember, number 6 was Jason Gilden from 1994. Number 5 was Max Starks from 2004. Number 4 was Joey Porter from 1999. Number 3 was John Kolb from 1969. Number 2 was Hines Ward from 1998.
Number 1.
And number 1, your number 1 all-time third-round draft pick, and this guy is a Hall of Famer. He has 4 Super Bowl rings. It is none other than the cornerback Mel Blount. Many people might not realize that Mel Blount was a third-round draft pick, but coming out of Southern University, some people overlook those HBCU players. The Steelers did not. Mel Blount is still the all-time team leader in interceptions with 57. He had 5 Pro Bowls, a 4-time Super Bowl champ, every bit a part of that Steel Curtain defense. 2 times he made the first team of the Associated Press's All-Pro team. He was the defensive MVP in 1975, where he had 11 interceptions. What can you say about Mel Blount that hasn't already been said? The man defined the cornerback position. He was physical. He was feared. He brought the pain. He also was the playmaker to make the interceptions. He was a pillar of that defense. And many people talk about, who would you rather have between him or Rod Woodson as your top Steelers all-time cornerback. Mel Blount. Rod Woodson, he has the 3rd most interceptions in the history of the NFL, and he went on to build on that with other teams. But Mel Blount, in his time, he had 57 interceptions. That's 13th all time. He's still up there in that top list. You have to respect that. And also, the NFL, they created the Mel Blount rule, the 5-yard bump and run rule. That was because of Mel Blount. And because of how physical he was and how dominating he was, the NFL had to impose that. And still, after they instituted that rule in 1977, the man had 6 interceptions in 77, 4 interceptions in 78, made 2 more Pro Bowls and another All-Pro team in 1981 when he had 6 more interceptions. This guy is such a legend. I love watching his tape and looking back at the way that he played and the physicality that he put on other teams. And one thing I think that when you talk about the debate of all-time cornerbacks, and I think Mel Blount is often overlooked when you talk about who would you put in an all-time secondary. And Rod Woodson, I saw him once talking with other NFL players and legends and such. And when people were talking about comparing the 2000 Ravens defense to the 70 Steelers defense, he was saying like, what, I consider myself a great cornerback, but I consider Mel Blount to be much better than me, and he put Mel Blount as his top corner all time. That right there says a lot when Rod Woodson is saying he was better than him. He said he ran like a deer. Mel Blount, he established what it meant to be a cornerback for the Steelers, and that's why he's our top ever 3rd round draft pick for the Pittsburgh Steelers in team history. Did you like the list? We hope you did. If you didn't, you can hit me up at Carter Critiques or at DKPittsburghSports.com. We are all over this here on DK Sports Radio, always talking Steelers and Pittsburgh sports. Hope you like the list. Hit us up if you have any questions or any complaints about the list, or if you have another list you'd like us to go over. We'll certainly be going over them in the near future. But stay tuned to DK Sports Radio. We got a lot of great content. Remember, we cover the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Pirates, the Penguins, the Pitt, Penn State, and of course the Riverhounds, the soccer team of Pittsburgh. We do it all here at DKPittsburghSports.com. This is Chris Carter, NFL analyst. Stay tuned.